This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Atelia Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. Australia's foreign minister begins her East Asia tour in Japan with energy security front and centre. Both sides pledge closer coordination as the Middle East conflict disrupts supply chains. Her next stop, China. Well, Beijing's under pressure too. Leaders look to accelerate tech development and self-reliance while shoring up fuel supplies as economic strains grow. Tensions flare at the UN Security Council. Japan accuses China of worsening friction in disputed waters, while Beijing warns of Japanese militarism resurfacing. South Korea moves up a rung in global stock market rankings, leapfrogging the UK to 8th largest, powered by a surge in AI-driven tech. Also in the bulletin, the head of Pony AI tells CNA what he expects of the electric vehicle market from soaring fuel prices.
All our autonomous driving vehicles are powered by EV. So I think the EV adoption in the mid-run to long run, I think can be even higher.
From horses to hybrids, Mongolia's herders are turning to the Toyota Prius. It's now a common tool, but there is a catch to buying these cars. Japan and Australia seek closer coordination over energy security as disruption in the Middle East continues to hit fuel supply chains. Japanese Foreign Minister Toshimitsu Motegi held talks with his Australian counterpart Penny Wong in Tokyo. Ms. Wong said that the conflict has had a disproportionate impact on the Asia-Pacific region, adding that ties between Tokyo and Canberra will be critical, while the Strait of Hormuz remains effectively closed to shipping.
Our supply chains are closely linked. Imports of fuel from partners like Japan enable Australia to continue to be a reliable exporter of energy and food to the world.
Ms. Wong said that Japan and Australia would continue coordinating their response to the disruption. Today's meeting comes just days before Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi travels to Australia, where energy security, critical minerals and economic security are expected to be high on the agenda. Australia imports most of its fuel and has already seen localised shortages since the conflict started in February. After Japan, the Australian Foreign Minister will visit China and South Korea over the next few days to find ways the region can contain the fallout from the Middle East conflict. And for more on the Australian Foreign Minister's sweep through East Asia, we've got CNA senior correspondent Han Yu-Guan joining us live from Shanghai. Yu-Guan, walk us through first up the significance of Ms. Wong's visit to China and what should we be watching out for?
Well, the real significance here is that Australia sees China as too important to leave out when fuel supply chains are under pressure. Now, Penny Wong says this trip to Japan, China, and South Korea is about protecting shared energy security because the Middle East conflict and the closure of the Straits of Hormuz are disrupting global energy markets, with Asian refineries and the Indo-Pacific especially affected. So this is not just routine diplomacy with Beijing, it's part of Australia's response to a regional fuel shock. The clearest reason China matters is jet fuel. Australia imports most of its jet fuel from Asia, particularly China, Singapore, and South Korea. Now, those countries take crude from elsewhere, especially the Middle East, refine it, and then ship jet fuel to Australia. So the key here is not just who has oil on the ground, it is who can refine it, move it, and send it on when the system is under stress. China normally accounts for about a third of Australia's jet fuel, which makes Beijing directly relevant to whether Australian planes keep flying, air freight keeps moving, and logistics systems keeps functioning. Australia, after all, is a giant island with no land links anywhere. Now, if you recall, before North Asia, Penny Wong was also in Singapore about 2 weeks ago, working on the wider regional fuel chain before this China trip. Now, besides jet fuel, China also accounts for roughly 14% of Australia's fertilizer imports by value in 2025. So China supplies a meaningful share of two things that Australia cannot easily do without: jet fuel for aviation and fertilizers for its very important agriculture sector. But Australia is not going empty-handed. China also needs Australia's liquefied natural gas, iron ore, and critical minerals like lithium. These are raw materials that feed China's factories like those making its electric vehicles, for example. So this is a relationship of mutual dependence, not Australia begging for help. That's why this visit matters is a test of whether the newly stabilized relationship with Beijing can deliver something practical to their respective citizens under pressure. Now, what should we be looking for? Well, there won't be a dramatic breakthrough. I'll watch for practical language around jet fuel, fertilizers, shipping, and supply chain resilience. We know Penny Wong is in Beijing for the 8th Australia-China Foreign and Strategic Dialogue. So the real question is whether the relationship can produce useful coordination in a crisis, not just polite diplomacy. Otelli?
So speaking of their relationship, given China's close links with Iran, I mean, is there a chance that Canberra could perhaps turn to Beijing to help stabilize the Strait of Hormuz?
Yes, Australia could certainly look to China for help, but with realistic expectations. China has channels into Tehran that Australia does not. China buys Iranian oil and is one of Tehran's most important economic partners. While the two governments also describe each other as strategic partners and keep high-level channels open. That gives Beijing some access and some leverage. And China's public line is that the way to restore stability is to stop military actions and bring back peace and safe passage. In other words, Beijing is saying it can support de-escalation, but it is not claiming it can simply order Iran to reopen Hormuz. So yes, Australia can look to China as part of the diplomatic effort, but no, it cannot expect China alone to fix the problem. So the bottom line is this. China matters here because it helps keep Australia's jet fuel and fertilizers flowing, and because it is also one of the few countries with some leverage in Tehran. But it can help calm this crisis, not magically end it. Otelli?
Oh, many thanks for that report. CNA's senior correspondent Tanya Guan speaking to us live from Shanghai. Well, China as well looking to strengthen its energy security while vowing to pursue faster tech development and greater self-sufficiency. This comes as the country's economy begins to show signs of strain from the disruption in the Middle East. Now, China's Politburo, the nation's top decision-making body, announcing the directive after a meeting today, citing the need to respond to external shocks without directly referring to the war in Iran. Now, analysts say that China has a better chance of weathering the closure of the Strait of Hormuz with its ample oil reserves, heavy use of coal, and high adoption of solar, wind, and electric vehicles. But government data shows that the impact is already being felt. China's exports grew just 2.5% on year for March, sharply down from the more than 39% surge in February before the conflict started. Higher costs also reflected in last month's inflation data, with factory production costs rising out of deflation for the first time in more than 3 years. Now, over in Japan, authorities say they expect to secure 60% of the crude oil it needs for the coming month from alternative routes, including more imports from the US. That will also coincide with the release of an additional 20 days' worth of oil from its national reserves. The distribution of products derived from petroleum, however, remains a challenge, with industries calling on the government to ensure a stable supply. Now, turning our attention to South Korea, officials expect to secure up to 90% of pre-war naphtha supplies for May. Now, that's crucial for its petrochemical and other oil-derived industries. Seoul says that major firms in the sector are expanding plant operations in line with their inbound supplies. So far, the country has signed deals to exchange a combined 14 million barrels with companies under a crude swap system, allowing refiners to borrow from state reserves. Meantime, South Korea is investigating 4 firms suspected of hoarding medical syringes amid a ban by authorities from doing so. The nation's Food and Drug Safety Ministry says that some companies appear to be exploiting the supply crunch by stockpiling syringes and selling them at higher prices. Iran says that the United States can no longer dictate what other nations do as the Trump administration reviews Tehran's latest offer to unblock the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's proposal calls for the U.S. to end its blockade over Hormuz before Tehran reopens the waterway. It also wants an end to the war first, before negotiations on its nuclear program takes place. Tehran says that Washington must drop its, quote, illegal and irrational demands for peace talks to continue. UN Chief Antonio Guterres is urging for a full reopening of the Strait of Hormuz and a free passage without tolls. With only a handful of ships crossing daily, he warned that the disruption is driving up costs, slowing aid deliveries, and risking a wider food and economic crisis if the situation drags on. Well, in the latest sign of shipping activity, shipping data shows that a Panama-flagged supertanker carrying about 2 million barrels of Saudi crude attempting to pass through the waterway. The carrier is managed by Idemitsu Tanker Co., a unit of Japanese refiner Idemitsu Kosan. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi and Foreign President Vladimir Putin voicing their commitment to their country's strategic relationship. Mr. Araghchi thanked Moscow for backing diplomatic efforts.
جمهوری اسلامی ایران دوستانی داره مثل روسیه که در شرایط سخت در کنار ایران میمانند و از ایران حمایت میکنند. ما از مواضع شما و از حمایت شما بسیار متشکرم.
Well, we've got more coverage on the war in Iran. Do log on to cna.asia or our mobile app for the very latest. A time now for a short break, but coming up on East Asia tonight. Japan holds benchmark interest rates and warns growth would slow and corporate profits suffer because of the war in Iran. Plus, Auto China kicks off in Beijing with organizers calling it the world's largest auto show. Crowds are pouring in as the event opens to the public and runs through the weekend. Hello again. Good to have your company on East Asia tonight. Well, you're just in time for your business news with Roland Lim. And Roland, today we're talking about the Bank of Japan kicking off interest rate decisions this week. Any surprises there?
No surprise, but policymakers are increasingly divided on the path ahead as the Middle East war clouds the outlook and tests the country given its exposure to rising energy prices. The Bank of Japan held off raising interest rates again, sharply hiked inflation forecasts for the current year and halved growth projections. Now, growing worries about the war in Iran has pushed prices of oil and other products higher. Borrowing costs remains at 0.75%, where they have stood since July 2025. Now, the decision was widely expected, but the 6-3 vote by board members was not unanimous. Now, they face pressure to gradually raise rates after years of keeping them near or below zero to counter deflationary pressures. The central bank chief signaled commitment to normalizing the interest rate regime.
日本銀行としては基調的な物価上昇率が 2% に近づいている中、現在の実質金利が極めて低い水準にあることを踏まえますと、経済物価金融情勢に応じて引き続き政策金利を引き上げ、金融緩和の度合いを調整していくことになると考えています。
But conflict in the Middle East is complicating the BOJ's efforts to gradually raise its still low interest rates toward what markets see as a neutral level of around 1.5%. The central bank acknowledging growing pressure on wages and prices. It has raised its core inflation forecast for this year to 2.8%, and that's up from 1.9% previously. At the same time, rising costs could weigh on consumer spending and slow economic growth. Remember, Japan is particularly vulnerable to energy shocks from the crisis in the Gulf, sourcing more than 90% of its crude from the region. The central bank governor also attempting to allay concerns of energy disruptions caused by war in the Middle East. The yen's weakness is also a key policy concern, The hawkish hold today pushed the yen higher against the US dollar, but the currency has weakened some 1.8% so far this year and is now sitting near 160 per dollar, which is widely viewed as a threshold that could prompt intervention by Japanese authorities. The Nikkei 225 edging lower after the decision today. The rally in AI and tech stocks has pushed South Korea's stock market higher onto the leaderboard, displacing the UK in 8th place by market capitalization. The total value of all South Korean listed companies now tops $4 trillion, which is a 45% increase year to date. Now that's as UK companies only recorded a 3% increase to just under $4 trillion. Just over a year ago, the UK's market was worth twice as much as South Korea's. Well, this comes just less than 2 weeks after Taiwan's stock market overtook the UK, also driven by tech and the AI boom. Now, both South Korea's and Taiwan's key benchmarks are tech-heavy, with memory chip makers Samsung as well as SK Hynix accounting for under half of the KOSPI, which has itself over 800 constituent companies. Taiwan's TSMC itself dominates the island's benchmark Taiwan Weighted Index, and with the most recent rally, Taiwan is within earshot of Canada. Australia has unveiled new draft laws targeting tech giants Meta, Google, and TikTok. They will have to strike voluntary deals with local publishers or face a mandatory 2% tax on their Australian revenue.
This is not about government revenue. Every single dollar will go back to journalists, to paid for the journalism that you all produce here in the gallery, but in newsrooms right around the country produce as well. This is important for the integrity of the system.
The legislation is specifically designed to stop platforms from stripping news from their feeds when faced with rules requiring them to pay publishers for shared content. Now, advocates argue platforms are earning advertising dollars, and they use news content to keep users scrolling while depriving news companies of that revenue. The tech giants have yet to officially respond. Recent data from the University of Canberra shows 1 in 4 Australians now get their news mainly through social media. Japan is stepping up its efforts to support Vietnam's energy security while quietly reshaping regional supply routes. Idemitsu Kosan is shipping in an amount equal to about 10 days of Vietnam's crude demand, according to Nikkei Asia. Now, this could help sustain operations at the Nissan refinery. That's a major facility, partly owned by the Japanese firm. The petroleum giant is supplying around 4 million barrels of crude oil sourced through routes that bypass the Strait of Hormuz. The oil will be refined in Vietnam into fuel and materials used in plastics, key components in products exported to Japan, from cars and home appliances to everyday goods. Now, this move strengthens a growing supply chain between the two countries as Vietnam becomes increasingly vital to Japan's manufacturing ecosystem. Vietnam has faced challenges securing oil supplies, even requesting support from Japan earlier this year. With the refinery producing up to 40% of Vietnam's fuel, maintaining operations is critical, not just for local businesses, but for Japanese companies and exports tied to the region. Car enthusiasts and prospective buyers have gathered in Beijing for what organizers is calling the world's largest auto show. The biannual China Auto event opened to the public today and runs through the weekend. Organizers are expecting about 890,000 visitors from across China and overseas. Despite it being a weekday, lines formed at the exhibition halls as visitors got a closer look at the record of more than 1,400 vehicles on display, from advanced self-parking systems to AI-powered in-car assistance. Chinese and foreign automakers are showcasing their latest intelligent driving capabilities, many integrating AI into vehicles to get an edge in China's fiercely competitive market. Automakers also say higher fuel prices linked to tensions in the Middle East are helping to drive stronger interest in new energy vehicles.
新能源
为什么呢？
现在是省啊，总的价格要比那油价再涨。
智驾，整体的一个舒适度，还有驾驶的一个操控性、稳定性，然后只有在真正体验过之后，然后才可以下这个决定。
综合考虑吧。其实现在新能源的车价格已经很实惠了。
As it pushes toward greater commercial adoption, the head of Chinese autonomous driving firm Pony AI has told CNA the key components for large-scale robotaxi deployment are largely already in place. The company has announced upgrades to its core artificial intelligence model and expects to produce lower-cost driverless vehicles by 2027. Now, listed in Hong Kong last year, it is also eyeing overseas markets for growth. But what challenges stand in the way? Well, CNA's Rebecca Mateo speaks with Pony AI's CEO, James Peng, at the Auto Show in Beijing.
We actually have launched the World Model 1.0 about 3 years ago, where we can have the vehicles using reinforcement learning, meaning that it can learn by itself by interacting with all the surrounding traffic participants. But what's more important for the World Model 2.0 is that we are sort of evolved from reinforcement learning into a self-learning, meaning that for the World Model 1.0, human as a programmer, as us, we still give the vehicle evaluation. We still sort of instruct the vehicle to learn. And now in the World Model 2.0, the vehicles actually can judge how good is the driving by itself.
So how close is the company to large-scale L4 deployment, and what still needs to happen before robo-taxis become a common sight on our roads?
No, I think all the important factors are already in place. Now we are sort of in the evolution process. It's just launching more, right? So think about, in order to launch a robotaxi, we need to first produce the vehicle. Then we have to acquire licenses, build the facility to park those vehicles, and then launch them to the public. And then we have to do user acquisition as well. So in a way, I don't think there's one single block for large-scale deployment. It just takes time.
How do you see growth balancing China and overseas markets at the same time amid a weaker domestic demand?
Do see, especially in the fully driverless field, L4, robotaxi, we actually see there's quite strong domestic demand because we're such a nascent market. And in the, for example, in the first 4 Tier 1 cities that we have launched our services, we have seen there's a strong demand from the local residents to take our rides. And similarly, of course, we see there's a gradual trend for international markets, Middle East, especially European markets. There's a lot of European cities come to talk to us for launching L4 services. So I think in the next coming years, we'll see there's going to be an exponential growth.
We're currently facing higher oil prices because of tensions in the Middle East. So how is this affecting demand for EVs and smart vehicles?
Our exported vehicles have been delayed in arriving in the Middle East. But I think in the mid-term or even long run, it's changed the consumers' behavior and perception that there could be a disruption to oil and gas. But at the same time, all our autonomous driving vehicles are powered by EV. So I think the EV adoption in the mid-run to long run, I think can be even higher. When we talk with the local partners and the local governments, they're actually even more committed to support autonomous driving.
Now, with safety incidents sometimes making headlines, how does Pony AI plan to build public trust?
I think first and foremost is we're actually very safe. So less accidents, less blocking traffic. I think the second is to build the trust with the regulators and with the public groups, of course, through the public education. I think gradually, as we are launching more and more vehicles on the road, people can actually see it, and seeing is believing.
And a quick check on some of the biggest Chinese auto companies and how they're performing today. Screen is lit green, reflection of the intense competition in the auto market. BYD shares down 2.17%, SAIC Motor down 0.7%, Sherry 1.5% in the red. And Pony AI shares also nearly 4% lower. Shares of the company has lost more than a third of its value since it went public in Hong Kong. And that's it for business for right now, but I'll be sticking around after the commercial break.
All right, looking forward to speaking again. Thanks, Roland, for now. Right, time now for another break, but coming up on East Asia tonight, two major cross-border deals abruptly halted. China blocks a US AI takeover, while Japan stops a foreign buyout. National security appears to be the common thread, but questions remain. An expert will be joining us after the break to unpack what's driving these moves. You're watching East Asia tonight, and here are the headlines we are following. Australia's foreign minister begins her East Asia tour in Japan, with energy security front and centre. Both sides pledge closer coordination as the Middle East conflict disrupts supply chains. Her next stop, China. Beijing's feeling the pressure as well. Leaders look to accelerate tech development and self-reliance, while shoring up fuel supplies as economic strains grow. Plus, tensions flare at the UN Security Council. Tokyo accusing Beijing of worsening friction in disputed waters, while China warns of rising Japanese militarism. Now, Meta Platforms is preparing to unwind its acquisition of artificial intelligence startup Mideast after China blocked the deal on national security grounds. Well, that's according to the Wall Street Journal. Now, Meta and Mideast have yet to make public statements on the deal being scuppered. And that makes two major cross-border deals stopped in their tracks in just within a week. Japan had also halted private equity firm MBK's bid for precision machinery maker Makino Milling. Now we've got Roland Lim here back again in the studio to tell us a little bit more about this. So Roland, essentially, are we seeing a pattern here?
Well, we're definitely seeing a growing pattern. I mean, the grounds for it is the same, national security. What is different is that these two cases are coming from different directions. I mean, China is blocking a US company from acquiring one of its homegrown AI startups, while Japan is actually protecting one of its companies from a takeover from a foreign buyout. So in China's case, I mean, there are concerns that sensitive AI tech might actually leave the country. And in Japan's case, Makino is a high-precision machinery tool-making company and lies in the heart of Japan's defense as well as semiconductor industry. So Tokyo doesn't want that going to the wrong hands as well.
But just to clarify things, I mean, this just isn't an Asian story, is it?
No, not at all. I mean, this global phenomenon has been accelerating. I remember back in 2025, we had ex-President Biden actually stopping Nippon Steel from buying over US steel on national security grounds. And then more recent, and that actually ired Japan, Tokyo, because Japan is seen as a close ally to the US. And then in January this year, President Trump also forced the unfurling of a China-related trade deal to buy over the chip assets of a US firm known as MCore, specifically because they were worried that specialized chips might also fall into the wrong hands.
Roland, also then, I guess the next question is, I mean, is there this risk, right, that this starts looking less about security and more about protectionism?
I mean, that is the heart of the issue here. With Mideast, it's Beijing actually protecting its own homegrown AI tech from foreign acquisition. But it does, to some analysts, sound like industrial policy that's wrapped around security language. In the case of Makino, well, the private equity firm that wanted to take it over was actually a private equity firm. It wasn't a foreign government. It wasn't a defense company. So was it a case of just Japan wanting to make sure that it was a security threat? Or was it the case that it was reluctant to see one of its strategic core assets actually changing hands? So, I mean, that's the debate I think nobody in the government actually wants to say out loud at this point in time.
So we've just sort of skimmed the surface here. There's still plenty more to unpack. And we're going to keep this conversation going by introducing our next guest, William Ma, CIO of Grow Investment Group. And he's speaking to us all the way from Shanghai. William, thanks for joining us this evening. I want to talk about the Mideast deal first up. I mean, is this fundamentally an AI sovereignty story? I mean, Beijing asserting that, its most promising AI cannot simply be, bought and absorbed by a US tech giant.
Well, at this stage, I don't think it's a so-called an AI sovereign story yet, if you like. Because, as a matter of fact, you're seeing another story today is the IPO of, some of the very successful, AI, hardware company in Hong Kong went up by, 3.5 times. So I think the IPO pipeline is still smooth in Hong Kong, indicating the Chinese government is not blocking. But at the same time, I would also argue that the China so-called AI story is getting more importance or recognized globally, meaning that technology is being more global prominent, if you like. And I'm expecting there will be more situations like this because it means the global recognize the AI know-how of the Chinese company and entrepreneur.
William, beyond the Mideast deal, though, has China fired a warning shot to foreign buyers out there that's eyeing a Chinese tech company? I mean, what does this signal to the investment community out there?
Yes, I would come in from another angle. I agree that actually this is an indicator, and to be honest, this is very high profile, from my perspective, but it's not to the global buyer. I think it's to the Chinese company. And my view on this situation are quite similar. In some of the cases before, some of the Chinese company want to, listing in NASDAQ, etc. But the key point is a warning signal to the Chinese company that if they wanted to go global, go listed, being acquired, they have to follow the rules and procedure and well inform the Chinese government in what their plans.
So, William, there's a structural question here as well. Mideast being incorporated offshore, the kind of arrangements that's typically designed to make cross-border deals easier. So then, is this pathway no longer available for Chinese companies?
I don't think it's no longer available, but at the same time, interesting enough, the devil is in the details. If you look at, the rules, actually the Chinese government dig up an old, law 15 years ago about, foreign investment. So I think this is an indicator that, again, that, if the Chinese company want to be either acquired or listed in Hong Kong or NASDAQ, it's better for them to file a procedure for listing, get the blessing from CSRC, and then that will be happen. Because besides Mideast, to be honest, I'm seeing a huge demand of IPO pipeline in Hong Kong, and there is a lot of so-called pre-IPO or cornerstone investor, local and global, are already in those deals, are investing, and actually they are doing fundraising as we speak. So I don't think it will change the so-called structure in the long term, but this is a warning to the Chinese company that they have to do it or go by the playbook that is, get the blessing from the CSRC.
But public funding aside, if you were a venture fund sitting on a stake in a Chinese AI startup right now, how would you be rewriting your exit strategy?
Good question. I think the key for the AI startup, if you like, is a good example like DeepSeek. To be honest, the most precious right now in the AI industry is not just AI infrastructure, it's about the talent. So the key is whether you can get equity or capital market with a good valuation so that you can get good enough incentive to hire the people to join the firm. That's why, DeepSeek is raising a good round at a very good valuation compared to the listed company in Hong Kong. So for those startups, I would argue that, they would do both Hong Kong and offshore fundraising, but the idea is to create a strong alignment of interest. The second point is, besides, VC and PE, I'm also seeing some of the mid and big, mega size, corporate, they are also very early investing in this type of, AI infrastructure or AI company. Those endorsement is also very important because down the road, it would become an oligopoly market. So the advice to the VC and PE is they have to so-called partner with some of the tycoon, mega cap, so that when they grow bigger, they would be part of an oligopoly, ecosystem.
So, William, just zooming out here then, are we watching a broader shift where cross-border deal-making, is not just, is this a good deal, but more so, will a government let it happen?
Yes, I think the government blessing is very important, and the second point is quite global, if you like. We are not just talking about US and China. I was in India a month ago and then, in the UAE like 3 months ago. And we are seeing there are more global capital want to invest in the China market, AI, technology, high-end manufacturing. From the Chinese government or from the Chinese company perspective, they also want to explore and diversify their marketplace. Because at the end of the day, the tariff, the antitrust is quite global. And sometimes when I talk to the entrepreneur in China, they also worry that, if they are going to the US market, what if there are new rules that they cannot access the market because of that? So this is fundamentally is a risk for the business model as well. So the short answer is I'm also seeing not just from the government, but from the company, from the management perspective, they want to have, investor like from Singapore, from Middle East, from India, so that when they access the local market, they can be more diversified.
William, at the same time, China now has a mechanism that looks a lot like the America's CFIUS. That's the interagency that reviews foreign acquisition of US companies on national security grounds. Does this mark a moment that economic nationalism has become fully institutionalized on both sides, China and the US?
Yes, I think it's a fair comment on that part because, to be honest, the statement today is very powerful and the message is very strong because you don't recall the Chinese government doing that in recent years. But I would also argue that it would not so-called mark, the so-called national security playbook because at the end of the day, if you look at some of the high-tech companies like the LLM, they are already listed in Hong Kong. There are some in the pipeline and AI infrastructure, etc. So I do believe there still be globalization, in that regard. But, this is a wake-up call for the Chinese company. If they do not get the blessing from CSRC or if they don't go by the playbook, chances are, despite they finish the deal, that could be recalled or stopped, if you like.
Well, some great perspectives there. Thank you so very much for your time and thoughts, William Ma, CIO of Grow Investment Group, and of course, Roland Lim as well for your thoughts. Now, China and Japan clashing at a UN Security Council meeting on maritime security. Now, Tokyo raised concerns about rising tensions in the East and South China Seas, warning that disputes threaten global shipping routes. Its Vice Foreign Minister reiterating opposition to any attempts to change the status quo by force and stressed the importance of freedom of navigation. China has hit back, calling the remarks unwarranted and insisting the regions remain stable and open. Beijing's deputy UN ambassador instead accused Japan of provoking tensions by sending its vessels through the Taiwan Strait, saying that such actions send the wrong signal to Taiwan, a self-governed island that China claims as its own. The Chinese official also warning of, quote, a new militarism resurging in Japan. He said that right-wing forces are steering its security policy towards an offensive posture, pointing to Japan's recent easing of restrictions on the export of lethal weapons and increased military spending. Now, Taiwan says that its naval and air forces are on alert after it spotted 2 Chinese warships operating in waters near Penghu Islands. According to Taiwan's defense ministry, a Chinese destroyer and a frigate sailed into waters southwest of the Penghu Islands, home to major Taiwan Navy and air bases. Taipei said that the naval formation was monitored and it responded, quote, appropriately, using naval and air forces. While Taiwan frequently reports the crossing of the median line by Chinese aircraft, it is seen as rare for it to highlight details of where Chinese warships are operating. Taiwanese President William Lai, in a speech to Coast Guard officers, said that Beijing's gray zone operations have increased day by day. They refer to irregular tactics intended to exhaust an opponent. China said earlier this month that its regular military activities around the island are justified and reasonable. Now, the Philippines says it is not concerned about any reduction in U.S. deterrence in the Indo-Pacific, despite the ongoing conflict in the Middle East. But it warns China could try to seize any perceived opening. Philippines Defense Secretary Gilberto Teodoro said that Beijing's recent moves in the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait came as no surprise, adding that China tends to act when it believes rivals are preoccupied elsewhere. Mr. Teodoro said that any perceived opening is likely to be acted on by China. Still, Manila remains confident in its alliance with Washington. Mr. Teodoro said that the Mutual Defense Treaty remains solid, and he dismissed concerns that tensions involving Iran could stretch U.S. focus in Asia, pointing to ongoing joint military drills as a clear signal of continued American commitment. A time now for a break, but coming up next on EastAsia Tonight. Out on Mongolia's plains, herders are swapping saddles for the Toyota Prius. Cheap, reliable, and everywhere. But this modern fix is turning into a growing problem. We find out how. South Korea's foreign ministry is reviewing a response to a letter from U.S. Republican lawmakers who have called for an end to what they say are discriminatory regulations against American-owned Coupang and other U.S. companies. It comes as South Korea investigates Coupang's massive data breach affecting more than 33 million users. The South Korean lawmakers have pushed back, accusing Washington of political pressure. Some 90 legislators are planning to lodge a formal complaint with the U.S. ambassador, warning that any such pressure would infringe on judicial sovereignty. Now, they insist that the investigation must remain independent and free from external influence, while cautioning that doing so could encourage companies to seek political leverage in domestic legal matters. Now, the dispute has grown into a wider source of friction between Washington and Seoul. Now, South Korea's top nuclear envoy has called North Korea's nuclear program the most urgent challenge to global non-proliferation efforts. Vice Foreign Minister Jung Yun-do described Pyongyang as a unique case due to its history with its nuclear non-proliferation treaty, a global pact aimed at curbing the spread of atomic weapons. North Korea had joined the treaty back in 1985, but withdrew in 2003 as it moved to develop its weapons. Mr. Jong urged for a clear message to be sent that only a return to the treaty can ensure security and prosperity. Now, the official also called on Russia to cease what he described as illegal military cooperation with the North, and that it should uphold its responsibilities in protecting the global non-proliferation regime. Some experts say that Moscow may be supporting Pyongyang's missile and nuclear agendas in exchange for the participation of North Korean troops for its war against Ukraine. An exhibition at the UN headquarters in New York is displaying the devastation caused by the 1945 U.S. atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It is the fifth of its kind, held on the sidelines of a review conference on the landmark Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty that started yesterday. The exhibit, held by a group of atomic bomb survivors from Japan, showcases photos and materials related to the nuclear attacks in the closing days of World War II. More than 50 items are on display, including a clock that stopped at the time the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. Now, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres said that it is a reminder of the cost of nuclear warfare. Separately, Japan conveyed a message from Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi urging for greater unity towards non-proliferation.
More than 8 decades have passed since the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Now we face an urgent imperative to maintain and strengthen the NPT, our vital framework for international cooperation, and thereby ensure that it is passed on to future generations in an even more robust form.
Now some headlines from media outlets in East Asia. NHK says that multiple people have been injured after an explosion at a pharmaceutical plant in Japan's Hiroshima prefecture. Police say a storage tank detonated late today in Miyoshi City. Flames were reported rising from several tanks as firefighters and emergency crews rushed to contain the blaze. The South China Morning Post reports that homeowners in the only block left undamaged by Hong Kong's deadly Wong Fuk port fire will now be included in the government's resettlement plan. The move comes after about 75% of residents signalled interest in a buyback scheme, as authorities prepared to demolish and redevelop the site. And Yonhap News Agency says that a South Korean appeals court has increased the prison sentence for former First Lady Kim Kyung-hee to 4 years on corruption charges. She was found guilty of stock price manipulation and accepting luxury gifts. Prosecutors had earlier sought a much longer 15-year term. Now, across Mongolia's vast grasslands, a new workhorse is transforming the way livestock is herded. But it's not a horse, a dog, or even a motorcycle. It's the Toyota Prius. Now, hybrid cars are now a common tool for rounding up cattle. In the first of a two-part series, CNA's Jack Board finds out that this more comfortable way of life is also creating an unexpected problem.
It's warm, it's comfortable, and for many, it's better than a horse. Meet the Toyota Prius, an unlikely modern tool for Mongolia's nomads herding livestock. From the jammed avenues of Ulaanbaatar to the remote reaches of the Gobi Desert, Mongolia is awash with cheap, end-of-life hybrid electric cars imported from Japan. Hybrids make up nearly half of the vehicles in the country, most of them Priuses.
Ulaanbaatar бол мэдээж Prius бол яг түрүүний хэлсэн тий ашиглалтын зардал багтаа худалдаж авах үн бага тэгээд эвдрэл хэмтэл багтаа засвар үйлчлэгийн зардал багтаа учраас дээр нь нөгөө монголчууд чинь айл болгон гаражгүй учраас гадаа тавьдаг. Тэгээ нөгөө өвөл одоо шөндөө бол хас 35-40 хүрдэг штэ. Тэгэхэд бол ганц дараа л асчдаг тий. Тэр нь бол айгүй нөлөөлөд байгаа байхгүй.
But there's a big problem. Even though locals say that the Prius performs remarkably well in a country with some of the harshest winters in the world, it was never really designed for deserts and windswept plains. These electrified vehicles are the modern-day workhorse for the country's nomads and herders. But just like for its people and its animals, life out here is tough for cars, and it's also where they go to die. In such brutal climate conditions, the batteries in these ageing hybrids are failing fast. Mongolia has inadvertently imported a new form of waste.
Үүнийг дагаад биднэрт ямар асуудал гарч ирсэн бэ гэхээр хог хаягдлын асуудал гарч ирж байна. Хог хаягдал дотроо мөн аюултай хог хаягдал буюу яг энэ одоо төрлийн тээврийн хэрэгслүүдийн батарейг бид хэрхэн устгах юм бэ, хэрхэн цуглуулах юм бэ, хэрхэн хадгалах вэ гэдэг дээр маш хүндрэлтэй асуудлууд биднэрт гарч ирсэн.
The Prius may be Mongolia's unlikely hero, but even the toughest workhorse doesn't last forever. And across this vast landscape, a new question is emerging. What happens when they stop running? In part 2 of this series, find out where these batteries end up and the growing environmental risks Mongolia now faces. Jack Board, CNA, Ulaanbaatar.
Oh, we'll be checking in with Jack again tomorrow. Meanwhile, if we've got more stories about the hidden costs of electric vehicles across Asia, do visit our interactive feature at cna.asia or on our mobile app. And that wraps up Tuesday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Thanks for your company, and I'll see you again tomorrow.